All right, get ready to dive into economic history with us today. We're going to explore why some nations become powerhouses while others, well, they kind of struggle. And believe me, it's not as simple as just having the right
You
resources.
got that right.
Our guide for this journey,
A fascinating book by David S. Landis.
it's called The Wealth and Poverty of Nations.
And in it, Landis argues that, it's often culture and technology that are the real game changers, those hidden factors, like the secret sauce that can really make or break a nation's success.
Okay, so let's break this down, starting with Europe, way back in the medieval period.
Oh, yes.
I know, knights and castles, not exactly what comes to mind when you think like cutting-edge economic theory, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but this era actually saw a revolution
Yeah.
in how people were harnessing energy and even organizing labor.
It was pretty remarkable.
It was. Like, take the wheeled plow, for example.
Yep.
Seems like, such a simple tool, but adopting it, especially when you combine it with using animals for power, it's supercharged agricultural output.
Absolutely, especially in those areas where the soil was really tough to work with.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly you unlock these vast new areas that could now be used for farming.
It's like the internet of the medieval world, right? Suddenly, boom, new possibilities.
Yeah, I like that.
And it wasn't just about tools, was it? I mean, this whole putting out system where merchants were outsourcing work to rural folks, that was a pretty big shakeup too, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely faced pushback from the established guilds.
Yeah.
But in places like England, this system, it meant cheaper production.
Yeah.
So it really set the stage for the kind of industrial growth that was to come.
So we're already seeing how Europe's they're innovating, right?
Yeah,
And they really went all in on water power, like way beyond what other cultures were doing at the time.
that's right. And what's fascinating is that water mills themselves, they weren't unique to Europe.
Right.
I mean, other civilizations had them, but it's the sheer variety of uses that the Europeans found for them that really stands out. I mean, they were using them for fulling cloth, hammering metal, even for paper making.
Wow.
Which, get this, was actually invented in China but never mechanized there.
Wait, they had the technology but didn't go for mass production. I'm starting to see how deeply culture is tied into all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
But okay, let's fast forward a bit to the age of exploration.
Okay.
Portugal and Spain, both looking to build these global empires,
Right.
but their methods are completely different.
Very much so.
So tell me about that.
Well, the Portuguese, they were all about this really methodical, systematic exploration. And they were driven by trade, by profit. They created these incredibly detailed maps, almost like a business plan for their expansion.
Whereas the Spanish, it sounds like they were more about grabbing land and gold as fast as possible.
That's a good way to put it.
Not exactly a long-term strategy.
You could say that. You can almost see this short-term thinking reflected in their art and architecture of the time.
Yeah.
Grandiose, for sure, but often lacking the practicality of, say, the Dutch. In the end, the Portuguese, they built this lasting trading network, while the Spanish Empire, despite all its initial wealth, it struggled to keep up economically.
So even how they explored reveals these deeper cultural values, right? It's not just about what they did, but how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next up, let's talk sugar.
Right.
Everyone loves a sweet treat, but the development of this whole sugar plantation system, that involved a whole bunch of European powers, didn't it?
It did.
And each one, doing things their own way, as usual.
As usual. The Portuguese, they were early adopters of sugar cultivation in Brazil. And then you have the Dutch. They were basically the sugar masters,
Yeah.
They were experts in production, refining, and finance.
So they were always on the move.
Right. They were. Always looking for the next big opportunity. From Brazil to the Caribbean, always chasing those cane fields.
So you could say they were like the original disruptors of the sugar world.
I like that. They were highly efficient and had this really integrated approach, creating these large-scale plantations that were all part of this complex and very profitable system. And the English followed a similar path, especially in the Caribbean.
But the Spanish, weren't they also in the sugar game?
They were, but their approach was, it was different. For them, sugar was more about status and lifestyle than just pure business. Their plantations lacked that intense focus on efficiency and being part of a bigger economic machine,
Which we saw with the English.
Right.
So yet again, different cultural values leading to totally different economic outcomes.
It's a recurring theme.
It is. Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. But speaking of patterns, the Dutch East India Company, they started as traders, didn't they? What made them different from just regular merchants?
Well, their initial goal was trade, you know, establishing these profitable routes to Asia, but the competition was fierce. And well, this constant drive for profit is sort of pushed them into acquiring territory, getting involved in politics, things like that.
So it's almost like the company itself was being pulled in two different directions.
Yeah.
Trade on one hand and then empire building on the other. I'm sensing a bit of a slippery slope here.
It is an interesting question, isn't it? Does trade inevitably lead to conquest? I mean,
Hmm.
think about what they call their country trade, where Dutch ships were moving goods between different Asian ports. So they weren't just bringing stuff back to Europe, they were shaping the whole network of trade within Asia.
Whoa, so they were like running their own mini global economy within Asia. I mean, that's pretty mind-blowing, but it also makes me wonder about, the long-term consequences of that kind of power.
For sure.
Speaking of empires, we can't ignore the British East India Company's rule in India.
Right.
They had a very specific view of their rule there, didn't they?
They did. They saw themselves as, well, as benevolent overlords, claiming that their interests were aligned with the Indian people.
But that sounds a little, self-serving, doesn't it? Like they were trying to justify their own economic interests under this guise of helping India.
Well, their actions often contradicted their words, their
Yeah.
policies. They led to the decline of the Indian cotton industry. And they were really slow to introduce modern industrial technologies to India.
Hmm. That's a pretty stark contrast to their own rapid industrialization back home, wouldn't you say?
Indeed.
It raises some serious ethical questions, doesn't it?
That's not
About the cost of empire and the challenges of trying to balance profit with the well-being of the people you're ruling over.
a very complex issue.
It's definitely not a black and white situation. It seems like there's a lot of gray area when it comes to empires and economic development. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that seems kind of counterintuitive. Cultural barriers to industrialization. Why would some societies actually resist progress?
It's not really about resisting progress itself. It's more about how cultural values and attitudes, towards work, innovation, technology, all of that can sometimes clash with the kind of mindset that's needed for rapid economic development.
So it's not that they're actively saying no to progress, but their culture might make it harder for certain types of progress to take hold.
Exactly. Landis uses this example of the Hidalgo mentality in Spain.
Mm.
This was a cultural ethos where status and leisure were really prized and manual labor was looked down upon.
It's like work, you, gross, pass the tapas.
Well, put simply, yes.
Yeah.
This attitude created this social structure that didn't exactly encourage entrepreneurship and innovation, especially, in fields that required practical skills and technical expertise.
So even though Spain was swimming in wealth from its colonies, they lacked the cultural drive to invest that wealth in a way that would actually fuel industrial growth.
It's a classic case of how cultural values can sometimes be more important than material resources.
Okay, so we've got Spain on one end of the spectrum, but what about the other end? What were some of the cultural values that seemed to help other countries really embrace industrialization?
Well, Landis highlights the Protestant ethic, which initially placed a very strong emphasis on hard work, being frugal, and really saw economic success as a sign of God's favor.
So basically, working hard and making money wasn't just, okay, it was practically religious duty, but wasn't that like a pretty big shift from how people traditionally viewed wealth?
Oh, yeah, especially in Catholic Europe.
Yeah.
It was a significant departure. Catholicism traditionally stressed charity, and not being overly attached to worldly possessions.
Right.
While this Protestant ethic, it encouraged folks to see their work as a calling and to strive for prosperity. It was seen as a way to glorify God.
It's amazing how a change in religious thinking could have such a profound impact on the economy.
It is remarkable.
But didn't it also change people's behavior in other ways, like their everyday habits and choices?
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, it led to people being more entrepreneurial, more willing to take risks, and to reinvest their profits back into their businesses.
Mm.
And it helped to shape a more disciplined and productive workforce, which was crucial for industrial capitalism to thrive.
It's like their whole worldview shifted.
It did.
They went from, seeing wealth as potentially dangerous to seeing it as a reward for hard work and living a virtuous life.
Exactly. Landis even contrasts Catholic and Protestant views on gambling to illustrate this point.
Oh, interesting.
He says, Catholics were against gambling because, you might lose and jeopardize your well-being. Protestants were against it because you might win and be corrupted by your success.
Wow, that's a really subtle difference, but it speaks volumes about their values.
It does.
Catholics focused on the potential harm of losing money,
Right.
while Protestants were more concerned with the potential moral pitfalls of being too successful.
Precisely. It just shows how deeply embedded these values were in their worldview.
It's mind-boggling how theological debates could have such tangible real-world consequences, shaping economies and societies.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not like the Protestant ethic was the only factor.
No, of course not. There were many other factors that contributed to the rise of capitalism. And Protestant ethic itself is a complex and sometimes contested theory. But it does highlight how cultural values, even ones rooted in religion, can have a powerful influence on economic history. It's a reminder that economics isn't just about numbers. It's about people, their beliefs, and the choices they make.
Speaking of choices, let's talk about how those choices can get complicated when science comes into play.
Go.
I'm thinking about the resistance to the heliocentric theory in Europe.
Oh, yes.
Why would people reject a scientific theory that, by all accounts, provided a more accurate view of the universe?
It's a classic example of how cultural biases, often stemming from religious dogma, can really hinder the acceptance of scientific knowledge. The heliocentric theory, this idea that the sun is at the center of the solar system, it really challenged the long-held belief that the Earth was the center of creation. And that belief was deeply entrenched in Christian theology at the time.
So you had this head-on collision between scientific observation and deeply held religious beliefs. Sounds like a recipe for conflict.
It definitely was. The Catholic Church held immense power and influence in Europe, and they saw the heliocentric theory as a direct threat to their authority.
So if you were a scientist at that time, you were kind of in a tough spot. I mean, go against the church and you're basically asking for trouble.
Yeah. Land mentions French scientists like Mersenne, even the renowned Descartes. They understood the science, but they also had to navigate their own religious beliefs. It was a real dilemma for them.
So even brilliant minds were struggling to reconcile scientific progress with the prevailing cultural and religious norms of their time.
It highlights the fact that the pursuit of knowledge isn't always a smooth path. Cultural biases can create roadblocks, even for the brightest minds.
It's like trying to drive a car with the parking brake on. You might inch forward, but it's going to be a bumpy ride.
That's a great analogy.
Okay, so we've seen some examples of how culture can hold back progress, but what about examples where culture actually acted as a catalyst for change? I'm thinking about Japan again, the Meiji Restoration. It's often hailed as this incredible success story of modernization. What were the secret ingredients that allowed Japan to leap forward so dramatically?
Well, the Meiji Restoration was fueled by a convergence of factors, but a strong sense of national identity, a willingness to learn from other cultures, and a very pragmatic approach to modernization were key.
It's still mind-boggling to me how they went from a closed feudal society to a major industrial power in just a few decades. What was it about Japanese culture that made them so adaptable?
Even early European visitors to Japan observed their energy, their independence, and their openness to new ideas. They also had a strong work ethic and a deep respect for learning.
So it seems like they had the perfect cultural recipe for embracing the challenges of industrialization.
It does seem that way.
Their government also played a crucial role, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
They actively pursued modernization, right?
They did.
Sending delegations to study Western industrial practices, inviting foreign experts to Japan, and investing heavily in education and infrastructure.
All crucial steps.
So it wasn't just about culture, it was about having a government that was proactive and strategic in its approach to development.
Exactly. And crucially, they didn't just blindly copy the West.
Right.
They were very selective in what they adopted. They took the best ideas and technologies from the West and adapted them to fit their own needs and cultural context.
So it was about finding the right balance, wasn't it?
It was.
Between embracing new ideas and preserving their own unique identity.
Precisely. They understood that they couldn't simply replicate the Western model. They needed to find a path that was uniquely suited to Japan's strengths and cultural values.
And that path led them to become a major player on the world stage. I mean, their story is a powerful example for developing nations today, wouldn't you say?
It is.
It shows that it's possible to achieve rapid progress, even if you're starting from a position of relative disadvantage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Japan's journey highlights the importance of adaptability, strategic planning, and a willingness to learn from others while staying true to your own strengths.
Okay, so we've looked at examples of how culture can both hinder and accelerate economic development, but now I want to tackle a topic that's often a source of heated debate. The legacy of colonialism. Did colonialism ultimately help or hurt the economic progress of former colonies?
The impact of colonialism is incredibly complex,
Yeah.
and there's no simple answer. It varied widely across different colonies
Right.
and time periods.
Yeah.
Some argue that it brought benefits like infrastructure, exposure to Western technologies, things like that, while others say it was primarily a system of exploitation that left lasting damage.
It sounds like there are valid points on both sides of the argument.
For
It's
sure.
it's not a black and white issue.
It's not. It's important to avoid simplistic narratives and recognize the nuances.
Mm.
For example, while colonialism undoubtedly involved, oppression and exploitation,
Mhm.
it also sometimes led to the development of railroads, ports, communication systems,
Ah,
things
okay.
that could later support economic growth.
It's like a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
It brought certain advancements, but at a very high cost. But how did former colonies fare after they gained independence?
Right.
Did they all struggle, or were there some success stories?
Landis points out that many post-colonial nations, they had a tough time achieving economic growth. Often this was because they rejected market-based systems. But some former Japanese colonies, like South Korea and Taiwan, they actually achieved remarkable success.
That's really interesting. So it wasn't just about being a former colony or not.
Right.
There were other factors at play. What made South Korea and Taiwan different?
Well, even under Japanese rule, these countries had cultural values that emphasized, education, hard work, a strong sense of national purpose, those sorts of things.
Okay.
And these values proved to be beneficial as they transitioned to market-oriented economies in the post-colonial era.
So what I'm getting from this is, even if you're starting late, the right cultural foundation can really help you move ahead. It's not just about throwing money at a problem. It's about having a society that's ready to embrace the challenges and opportunities of development.
That's a great point. The colonial experience offered both, opportunities and obstacles.
Right.
But how those were navigated often came down to the cultural context and the internal factors within each society.
All right, so that's colonialism. But we can't talk about development in the 21st century without talking about globalization.
You can't.
It seems like it's this massive force shaping the world economy, for better or for worse.
Globalization at its core is about the world's economies becoming more interconnected, through
Yeah.
trade, investment, and the flow of people and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been accelerating in recent decades thanks to, advancements in technology.
It seems like we're all connected now more than ever. I mean, you can buy products from anywhere in the world, and companies operate across borders like it's nothing. But is globalization ultimately a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I'm getting mixed signals.
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
There's a lot of debate,
Yeah.
Some argue it's lifted millions out of poverty by creating new markets and opportunities for developing countries. Others say it's making inequality worse and leading to the exploitation of workers in those same developing nations.
It's like, pick a side, globalization. But seriously, it sounds like we need to go deeper than just good versus bad.
We do. We need
Yeah.
to acknowledge the complexity and look at the nuances.
Right.
Yes, there are winners and losers, but globalization has also fostered, more cultural exchange and cooperation between countries.
So it's like anything else. There are pros and cons,
Right.
and the impact really depends on a bunch of different factors.
It-
But what about these anxieties we hear about, especially in developed countries?
Yeah.
People are worried about, jobs disappearing overseas and losing national sovereignty. Landis acknowledges those fears, and they're understandable. People are worried about their livelihoods, but he points out that that technological innovation, not just globalization, has always disrupted the economy.
He's right.
So new technologies have always come along and shaken things up.
Right.
It's not like this is a new phenomenon.
It's not.
But doesn't globalization kind of accelerate this process?
It can, but remember, throughout history, new technologies have also created new jobs while displacing old ones.
Mm-hmm.
The real challenge lies in how we adapt to those changes.
It's like we can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. Okay, so if we can't stop globalization, how do we make sure it works for everyone, not just, a select few?
The key is to embrace the opportunities it presents while mitigating the negative consequences. We need to invest in education and training, give people the skills they need to succeed in a globalized economy.
And maybe implement policies to make sure the benefits of globalization are distributed more fairly.
Exactly. It's about creating a system that works for everyone, not just those at the top.
Right.
But let's not forget about one of the most powerful aspects of globalization, the flow of ideas and knowledge.
It does seem like information travels at the speed of light these days. How is this impacting economic development, especially in developing countries?
This flow of ideas and knowledge is crucial. I mean, it drives innovation and progress, which ultimately fuel economic growth. And for developing countries, it creates opportunities to leapfrog ahead, bypassing traditional stages of development. Think about the widespread adoption of mobile phones in Africa.
Yeah, that's been a game changer, hasn't it?
Yes.
Suddenly, people have access to banking, education, healthcare, all through their phones. It's like they're catching up in an instant.
Exactly. It gives them access to information and resources they wouldn't have had before.
So in a way, globalization is making the world a little flatter, giving developing countries a chance to compete on a more level playing field. But are there downsides to this free flow of information? I mean, I've heard concerns about cultural homogenization.
That's a valid concern. I mean, when people are exposed to, the same movies, music, and products from around the world, it can lead to a loss of unique cultural traditions. But it can also lead to something more interesting, a blending of cultures.
So it's not just Western culture steamrolling everything else.
Not necessarily. It's a two-way street. Think about the popularity of K-pop or Bollywood films or Latin American music. Cultural influence is becoming increasingly multi-directional.
So it's more like a global cultural mashup.
Exactly. It's a more dynamic exchange of ideas and traditions.
Yeah.
I mean, globalization is creating a marketplace of cultures.
Okay, so we're all blending together, but in a good way. At least hopefully. But let's not forget about the future of work. How are globalization and technology impacting, the jobs we do, especially with automation becoming more and more prevalent?
It's definitely shaking things up. Globalization and technology they're creating a much more dynamic and fluid job market.
It's almost like the traditional lines between different types of jobs are blurring and everything's changing so fast.
Exactly. The rise of automation and AI is changing the game. Many routine tasks are being automated, which means workers need to focus on more creative and complex tasks.
So it's not just about robots taking our jobs, but about humans having to adapt and do things that robots can't.
Precisely. Jobs in the future will require different skills like critical thinking, problem solving, and communication. Skills that machines haven't quite mastered yet.
So we need to become lifelong learners, constantly adapting and picking up new skills to stay ahead of the curve. It's like a never-ending game of catch-up.
You got it. The days of working in the same job for your entire career are over. Workers need to be agile, adaptable, and embrace lifelong learning.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from medieval plows to sugar plantations to globalization and the future of work. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
But before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you said earlier, that history and culture provide the context for understanding why some nations prosper while others struggle.
They do. They help us see beyond just the numbers and statistics.
Yeah.
And appreciate the deeper forces that shape a nation's past.
Like economics is a story, and history and culture are the backstory that gives it depth and meaning.
Exactly. Lanzas doesn't just present dry economic theories. He weaves together history, economics, and the stories of real people making choices within their cultural context. That's what makes it so fascinating.
And understanding this bigger picture can help us, make better decisions, both individually and collectively, about how we want to shape the future. But speaking of the future, I can't help but think about the persistence of poverty
Yeah.
with all our wealth and technological advancements. Why haven't we solved this problem yet?
It is a tough question. Poverty is such a complex issue, and it's frustrating that it still exists despite all the progress we've made as a global society.
It's true. Poverty, it's not just about a lack of money.
Yeah.
It's tangled up with so many other factors. We're talking about economic inequality, limited access to education and healthcare, discrimination, political instability, and yes, even cultural
Let's
barriers.
hit on a lot of them.
It's like there's this whole web of interconnected issue,
Yeah.
and pulling on one thread doesn't necessarily solve the whole problem.
Exactly. We can't just, slap a Band-Aid on the symptoms. We have to address the root causes.
Yeah.
And that requires a much more um, holistic and comprehensive approach.
So where do we even begin to untangle this knot? Landis things suggest that while economic growth is important,
Yes.
it's not the be all and end all.
Right.
We also need to think about fairness, opportunity, and making sure the benefits of growth they reach everyone.
That's a key point. It's about creating a more inclusive and equitable society
Right.
where everyone has a fair shot at success, regardless of their background or circumstances.
Yeah.
We have to address the systemic issues that keep people trapped in poverty.
So it's not just about making the pie bigger, it's about making sure everyone gets a slice. And that leads to something else Landis emphasizes, human capital.
Yes.
Investing in people, their education, health, and skills.
It seems so obvious, right?
It does.
If you want a thriving economy, you need to invest in the people who will be driving that economy.
But it's easy to lose sight of that in the rush for short-term profits or political gains. We need to be more forward-thinking, don't we?
Absolutely. We need a more enlightened approach to development, and an approach that considers the long-term well-being of our societies.
Right.
Not just the immediate bottom line. We
Yeah.
need to ask ourselves, what kind of world do we want to leave for future generations?
A world where everyone can live with dignity and reach their full potential. A world without poverty. It's a big dream, but is it even achievable?
I believe it is. We have the knowledge, the resources, and the technology to make a more just and prosperous world a reality. What we need is the collective will and the courage to make it happen.
It sounds like we need a major shift in mindset, a shift in values.
That's where culture comes in. We need to nurture a culture of empathy, compassion, and a deep belief in our shared humanity.
A culture where we value people and their well-being over profits, where we prioritize cooperation and sustainability over cutthroat competition.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the true wealth of a nation isn't measured by its GDP. It's measured by the well-being of its people.
That's such a powerful way to frame it. It reminds me that economics is about so much more than just numbers. It's about people's lives and the decisions we make that shape our collective future.
And those decisions are always influenced by our values, our beliefs, our culture.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. We've explored so many fascinating ideas, and I think we've all come away with a deeper understanding of how history, culture, and economics are all intertwined.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
Before we sign off, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge. Think about what we've discussed today and ask yourself, how can we use our understanding of history, culture, and economics to create a more just and prosperous world for everyone?
It's a big question, but it's one worth pondering.
That's right. By engaging in thoughtful discussions, challenging assumptions, and working together to build a more inclusive and equitable society, we can make a difference. So keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, with all the wealth and the incredible technological advancements that we have today, why is poverty still such a persistent problem?
Yeah, you would think with everything we know and all the resources we have, we'd have figured this out by now.
Right.
but it's clearly more complicated than that.
It really is. And Landis, he dives into some of the theories about why some nations have struggled to achieve lasting economic growth.
Okay, like what?
Well, he talks about something called dependency theory.
Okay.
This idea that the global economic system is kind of rigged against developing countries, that they're stuck in this cycle of dependence on wealthier nations.
Ah, I see. So it's not just about their internal factors. It's about the whole global power structure, right?
Exactly. It's this argument that the rules of the game, so to speak, are set up in a way that benefits the already wealthy nations and keeps the poorer ones at a disadvantage.
Hmm. It sounds like a bit of a blame game, though, doesn't it? Like are developing nations really just helpless victims of the system?
Well, and that's where Landis gets a bit controversial.
I bet.
He's pretty critical of this dependency theory.
Okay.
He argues that while, yes, the global system has its flaws, there are also internal factors within these countries that play a significant role in their economic struggles.
So basically, he's saying, hey, it's not all the fault of the West.
You could say that. He really stresses the importance of things like good governance, sound economic policies, and yes, even cultural factors that can either promote or hinder growth.
So it's back to that idea that culture is a crucial ingredient in the recipe for economic success.
It's a recurring theme for sure.
It is. Okay, so if Landis is skeptical of dependency theory, then what does he propose as a solution to the persistence of poverty?
He doesn't offer any easy answers or quick fixes, but he does emphasize the need for a more balanced and nuanced approach to development, one that recognizes the complexity of the issue and avoids these simplistic one-size-fits-all solutions.
I'm starting to sense a pattern here. It's all about nuance.
Nuance is key.
Okay, so no easy answers, but what are some of the key ingredients that Landis highlights for achieving sustainable economic growth and reducing poverty?
Well, education is huge, of course.
Yeah.
Investing in human capital, making sure people have the skills and knowledge they need to participate in a modern economy.
Makes sense.
Then there's the importance of good governance, having transparent and accountable institutions that promote the rule of law, protect property rights, and create a stable and predictable environment for businesses to operate.
So basically, you need a government that's not corrupt and that actually supports its people.
Exactly. And then there's the need for sound economic policies that encourage investment, innovation, and entrepreneurship.
It's like creating the right conditions for businesses to thrive, right?
It is. And that often means embracing free markets and open trade. But Landis also cautions against this kind of blind faith in pure market forces.
Yeah.
He argues that there's a role for government intervention, to regulate markets, provide social safety nets, and ensure that the benefits of growth are distributed more equitably.
So it's about finding the right balance.
I'm always about balance.
Between the dynamism of free markets and the guiding hand of a responsible government.
Exactly.
It's almost like economics is this delicate dance.
It kind of is.
Where you need both partners to move in sync to create something beautiful.
I like that analogy.
I think we should wrap things up there. This has been such a thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
We've covered so much ground today, from the invention of the wheeled plow to the challenges of globalization.
We've spanned centuries.
We have, but I think the key takeaway here is that economic development is a complex process.
Absolutely.
It's shaped by a whole bunch of different factors: historical, cultural, political, technological, and there's no magic formula for success.
There isn't.
But by understanding these factors, by learning from the past, and by engaging in these kinds of thoughtful discussions, we can hopefully create a more prosperous and just world for everyone.
Here's hoping.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.